Hey guys, Hop here. Like a lot of you, I'm interested in adding thermals to my inventory. We hear all the time about how powerful thermal imaging is, and we've seen plenty of evidence of it over the last 10 years in conflicts around the world like Ukraine and Syria. But buying thermals is very intimidating. The hardest thing about buying night vision, other than finding $3,000 lying around, is choosing which meaningless number on the PVS-14 spec sheet to obsess over. But with thermals, before you even start shopping, you have to decide which type of thermal device you want, because they're all very specialized. We've talked before about the various types of thermal devices and their limitations. Today we're going to be going into more detail about thermal scopes versus thermal clip-ons. AGM loaned me the new V2 version of their Rattler scope to take a look at, so we're going to be talking about this one and comparing it to the AGM Stinger 640 multi-purpose monocular that I've covered in the past. Let's get into it.
With the lowly PVS-14, you can observe, move, and shoot at night, but thermal devices are broken up into categories like handheld binoculars, wearable binoculars, thermal weapon sights, clip-on thermal weapon sights, and fusion devices. In my opinion, handheld thermal binoculars are still the most cost-effective and turnkey way to add thermal imaging to your kit. They are a powerful observation tool. But I can also see the appeal of being able to shoot under thermal, maybe having a PVS-14 on your non-dominant eye and a thermal-enabled optic on the gun. It seems like a ton of nighttime capability with a relatively low number of overall devices. Also, relatively affordable devices. A PVS-14 and a mid-price thermal scope is probably going to come in at a similar price to night vision binoculars, for example. The thing I'm still stuck on is clip-on thermal versus dedicated thermal weapon sights. Clip-on thermal weapon sights mount in front of your magnified day optic either on a Picatinny rail mount or a mount that clamps directly to a scope bell. The view screens of clip-on devices are optimized for a scope, so you can't really look directly through them with your naked eye. The biggest advantage of a thermal clip-on is that it can be removed from the gun. Groundbreaking journalism, I know. So why does that matter? Thermals have a pretty limited range, usually given as a detection range, which is a function of the base magnification of the device, the size of the objective lens, and the resolution of the sensor. The top-end version of the AGM Rattlers have a 50mm objective lens and a 640-pixel resolution sensor. The thermal weapon sight version of that Rattler has a 2.5x base magnification, and digital zoom doesn't help all that much, so how far do you think you're shooting with that? A lot of guys would say you only need 10x magnification to shoot to 1,000 yards because they still buy into that old FUD lore, so how far is 2.5x going to get you? At least for daytime use, a mid-priced MPVO with a top-end magnification of 10, 12, 16 is just going to get you way farther than a thermal device. Thermals can be used in the daytime more safely than analog night vision devices, but they still don't do great. Their detection capabilities are most powerful at night. They're also just generally hard to use in direct sunlight because you have to look at a screen. So being able to dismount the thermal from your rifle and turn it back into a normal rifle, certainly an appealing feature. Thermal devices also have extremely limited battery life. The new AGM Rattler V2 series runs off of a proprietary battery pack and gives you about 9 hours on a full charge, which is about double that of their advertised battery life on the old models, which ran off of a pair of CR123s. In theory, you can keep extra battery packs on hand, a USB battery bank, or just keep feeding the thing with CR123s, but still, if it runs out of battery, all you get is a dark screen. Having a thermal clip-on that lasts for 1 or 2 nights, and then you can just take it off and go back to using a normal rifle, still better than having a weapon that goes down completely when the dedicated thermal weapon sight stops working. Clip-on thermal devices are also typically unmagnified, so if you combine that with a variable optic like an LPVO, you can get a nice usable range of magnification. 1x on the bottom end to treat it like kind of a thermal reflex sight up to a decent level of zoom. Higher resolution units let you use more of the day optic's zoom range. Almost all dedicated thermal weapon sights have a base magnification of 1.5, 2, or 2.5x. So they're always going to be a little slower to use at close range because they're a little bit zoomed in. But what about the disadvantages of a clip-on thermal? First of all, you don't get a direct view of the screen, so it's never the best possible viewing experience. The biggest potential downside to clip-ons is return to zero. Clip-on thermal imaging devices do cause a zero shift. In most thermal devices, you have to adjust the screen in the menu for whatever your specific scope and mount arrangement is. On a lot of them, you can save a bunch of different zeroed presets for different guns in theory, but if you mount it back in the same spot on the same gun, it'll probably return to zero pretty close, and considering these are for relatively close range shooting anyway, it's probably fine. None of that really works if you have to mess with the mount, like if you have to loosen or tighten a pick rail clamp to put it onto a different rail on a different gun, or swap clamps or inserts to mount it to a different scope. I don't think you can expect any kind of reliable return to zero if you're swapping between different platforms, so I'm not going to consider that to be a real upside. You can do the same thing with thermal weapon sights, and I'd probably trust those to return to zero better because they're going to mount to the receiver of the gun, not the handguard, not the scope bell.
If you're looking for a fun way to plink with thermal, if the weather's nice out, bring some frozen water bottles. It's a nice reactive target. And if it's cold out, bring some room temperature water bottles, I guess.
So what about dedicated thermals? The big advantage is that it stays mounted to the gun. You don't have room for a primary day optic, but you could still mount an offset RDS that has the same advantages as it does, like piggybacked with a high magnification scope. You can use it to quickly align yourself with a target before you look through the magnified thermal. You can also just use it at close range or as a backup or whatever. Because the thermal optic stays on the gun, it stays zeroed. Also, because thermal scopes are designed to work with your eyeball, you can take it off the gun and use it as a handheld monocular just for observation. Granted, that does kind of neutralize the first benefit, so it sounds like a pretty clear win for thermal clip-ons. But AR uppers are very cheap, so you could just put a thermal scope on a dedicated upper and keep it in the truck like a team rifle, the way some guys think of a sapper or other high caliber gun. Keep it in reserve and deploy it when needed. This hypothetical dedicated thermal upper doesn't need to have a nice light or laser on it. It doesn't even have to be all that nice because it's not going to get a high round count. It doesn't need to have a super accurate barrel because thermals are mostly for close range shots anyway. Thermal weapon sights also have a little bit of built-in magnification, which probably makes them a lot better at taking longer range shots. If you really want to shoot to longer ranges with thermals, you probably want something with a large objective lens, high resolution sensor, and a higher base magnification. A thermal scope with a base magnification of 3x is going to be a lot more effective than a 1.5x thermal scope with a bit of digital zoom enabled, or a clip-on thermal where you have to zoom your scope in onto a screen. At SHOT Show this year, AGM introduced a thermal scope which I think might be the world's first variable thermal. It's like a thermal LPVO or a thermal LCAN. It's basically two different lens assemblies in one thermal device, and you can use a throw lever to switch between them. Not cleanly like you would through the entire magnification range of an LPVO, but you slowly shift between two different lenses. I've talked to some guys who use thermals regularly for hunting and pest control, and what I usually hear is that they get more use out of short-range thermals, and the guys with the longer-range thermals are often at a disadvantage because it's hard for them to locate the targets. Ian from Forgotten Weapons ran an AGM Clarion thermal at the Moons Out 2024 match, and he never used the larger 60mm lens. Granted, the furthest targets out at Moons were probably 100 yards tops. So if you really want to be able to shoot further, you need to really push the base magnification and lens size. The Clarion with the highest resolution sensor and the 60mm lens has a base magnification of 3x. Digital zoom can probably push that to 6 before the image quality degrades too much, but you can still fall back on the smaller lens for shorter range shots, which may be what you're doing most of the time. So despite how confident I am in recommending handheld thermal monoculars as a useful piece of kit, I'm a lot less confident about thermal scopes and clip-ons. They both have their strengths and weaknesses, which is I'm sure why they both exist comfortably side by side on the market. I haven't compared a bunch of thermal devices side by side, so if you're in the buying stage, I'd recommend you check out some other channels that can give you side by side performance tests of different devices, especially different brands. I've mostly covered AGM thermals because AGM is nice enough to loan them to me for review. Hopefully some of this stuff was useful to you guys if you're in the same boat as me. You really want thermal, but you also don't shoot pigs every weekend, so it's kind of hard to understand what you can really do with it. And as I've said before, it's a lot harder to use thermal for fun than night vision. You can do so much with night vision. Thermal is basically you can shoot animals.
So cute.
If you guys have any questions, please let me know in the comments below. If you'd like to support this channel, you can do so via Subscribestar, link in the video description. You can also just subscribe to the channel on YouTube because that's free. It doesn't come with as many benefits as supporting me on Subscribestar to either you or me, but it certainly helps. See you guys next time.